To offer his analysis of the elections underway this Sunday in Ecuador and Peru, we now welcome Michel Marzuca, who is joining us from Chile and is Executive Director of the International Observatory of the Foundation for Democracy. Michel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your invitation.
Michel, this is in several ways a historic day for Latin America, as the results in Ecuador and Peru could help shape the region's political map. In the case of Peru, the country is experiencing a deep political crisis, with the political class shaken by a series of corruption scandals. It is expected that the results of the election for Congress members will see a fragmented parliament with a large number of different political forces present. How will this shape the next government?
We can say in that in Ecuador, as the first thing, we must bear in mind that, excuse me, did you ask me about Peru or Ecuador?
Sorry, beginning with Peru, beginning with the case of Peru and the political crisis that's underway.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, and you said through your news that there are 18 parties also considering that APRA didn't register candidates, no? And the unique probability for governability of the next elected government will have a guarantee of management through a parliamentary coalition to strengthen and have a government with the decision-making capacity and the execution of public policies. So you need necessarily a coalition in Congress that supports the government. And I'm talking about a parliamentary coalition that together with whoever is elected president of the republic and knock the executive power into shape, leads a government that has stability, strength, and the capacity to execute public policies. So that supposes a very great political effort of awareness and composition in the Congress. It is not an easy task, of course, because without any doubt, the historical political tradition of confrontation conspires with it, no, in Peru. Every time Peru had an executive different from the legislative, and it has ended up in a constitutional crisis. So I think they have just had recently 4 crises of constitutional government. So this conspires at the composition of their political personnel, no? So they need necessarily and a coalition. Other way, the crisis will continue the political crisis will continue in Peru.
Michel, as you said, in terms of the Congress, there are many different forces that could make it into the Congress, and that does mean that there's likely to be some sort of coalition formed in order for the government and to provide some sort of stability. There are 18 presidential candidates also running today. There's no clear favourite according to the polls, so it's very likely that there will be a second round vote in June. What do you think we can expect to see in terms of the presidential candidates today?
Well, the panorama is that we have 18 candidates, and 7 of them, they concentrate the 75% of the votes, no? That's the case of Pedro Castillo with roughly 18%, Hernando de Soto with 12%, Keiko Fujimori with 12%. This is roughly the situation. So and they have different trends politically talking. So none of them is going to carry out an agenda without a coalition, no? And so to guess who is going to win in this poll, it's I think we cannot tell surely who's going to be, but anyway, we're going to have a second round, no?
Michel, that's, as you said, is a very complicated situation going on in Peru, and the outcome of the elections remains very unclear. If we move on to Ecuador, where we see a race which is a bit clearer between two candidates that represent very different models. Even though the polls suggest a victory for Andrés Araúz, there are warnings that Guillermo Lasso could claim he's a victim of fraud if he loses. How big must Araúz's advantage be in order to avoid his victory being snatched away by claims of fraud?
Well, I think we must firstly we must bear in mind that in the 2017 election, with a high overall voting rate, Lenín Moreno defeated Guillermo Lasso by the narrow margin of 2.3%, and Lasso asked on that occasion for a vote recount, but finally had to accept Moreno's victory. So much will depend on the number of voters and therefore the absolute votes of difference, not the relative votes, not the percentage, but the absolute votes, the number of votes of difference. So the greater the citizen participation, the less the possibility of trying to question the legitimacy of the victory. But we must take in account, it is known to everyone what happened with Trump's defeat against Biden or Bolsonaro's statements in Brazil. So let's hope that the people decide by a wider margin than 2017, that's to say more than 3% in terms of percentage and high amount of voters.
Michel, Andrés Araúz represents a coalition of progressive forces, such as those that supported former President Rafael Correa and the Citizens' Revolution. We've seen a very long, a very strong campaign by right-wing sectors in Ecuador, supported by the media, against these progressive forces. Given the victory for Araúz, how do you think the government could try to overcome this kind of right-wing campaign to destabilize them?
We must remember that in that time, Rafael Correa made efforts to neutralize the right-wing press, even with the modifications to the organic law of communication, declaring the media as a public service and therefore regulated by the state. With Lenín Moreno, the right-wing press largely regained its framework of influence. No? We must also remember that Correa had many pressures to liberalize his economic policies, surely pressured by the risk of going against de facto powers, including the media. So I think that if Araúz is elected, he will have to assume that the attacks will continue. He will surely strengthen the state press. He will have to greatly strengthen his ties and closeness with the citizen movements in populations so atomized, organizationally talking. and he will have to move like a fish in water, like any left-wing American leader in front of the oligarchy and the external forces that want to maintain the status quo of domination.
Michel Marzuca, thank you so much for joining us. That's Michel Marzuca, who's the Executive Director of the International Observatory of the Foundation for Democracy, who's speaking to us from Chile. Thank you for joining us today and for offering your valuable insight into these significant elections in Peru and Ecuador. Thank you.
Thank you for your invitation, and see you soon.